What's going on, guys? Tower number 9 here, and today I'm going to do a tier list of all the legendary cards from set 1 and set 2 of Star Wars Unlimited TCG, and then we're going to go through the legendaries for set 3, and I'll predict how they're going to fall on the list. I'm not going to rank them in the same way because I don't know whether or not, I don't really know how they're going to shape up, but I want to at least discuss those cards and we can do some comparisons between sets. So yeah, let's get going here. And yeah, we're going to start off, and I want to just do a quick explanation of how my tiers work. So for this, S tier is going to be auto include. It's like if you're not playing this in a deck that can play it, I don't know what you're doing. And it's mostly going to be about the extent to which you want to play the card. And there's going to be a little power level consideration in there too, but it's mostly just going to be like, is this a card that you're always going to be wanting to play or not? So like S tier is like auto include, you always play it. A tier is like, this card is this card is very good, but it's not something that you're always going to want. There's some decks or some scenarios that you aren't going to play it in. B tier is going to be like, oh, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. There are some situations for it, but it's not on the same level as the A tier cards. And then C tier is going to be like, this is much more situational. I can see some decks playing it, but it's definitely not something that you would do normally. And then D tier is like, this is currently outright bad. So with that explanation in mind, we will start off here, and I'm going to show Avenger. So Avenger is a good example of how my philosophy sort of works here. I'm going to put it in A tier. So Avenger is a really strong card in overall power level. It's really good, but I'm not going to put it in S tier because a lot of decks don't support it. So Avenger is a late game win condition card. It's really strong, but it isn't something that's compatible with all builds. And for that reason, I'm going to put it up here. It's like high in A tier instead of being an S tier, just because decks that are kind of earlier game focused are probably not going to want to play Avenger at all. Even though it is an amazing card and a win condition, we're going to put it in the high A tier. Similar situation here for Super Laser Blast. Really important piece of the puzzle it's a really important piece of the puzzle for certain late game control oriented decks. And I'm going to think a little bit here about A versus B tier for Super Laser Blast. I think ultimately it ends up being a fair bit weaker than Avenger. It's still very good in its role. It's kind of the only card until set 3 at least. There's some more stuff coming, but it's kind of the only card in its role. I think I'm going to leave it in A tier here for now. Luke here, though, I'm going to bump him up to the S tier. So the reason for that is that Luke is so good that basically almost any deck that can play him does play him. He's just an excellent card in his role, and spoiler alert, Vader is up there too. These are both just really, really good. Vader actually has a little more competition these days from Maul, but to be honest with you, what I've often seen is people just playing both of them. So these are going to be in the S tier in my opinion, and they can be joined up here by Vigilance. Vigilance is like, maybe there's like an S plus tier that Vigilance should be in, because Vigilance is so good that not only is it played by all the double blue decks, it's actually played by decks that aren't double blue. It's like very normal for Vigilance to be played out of Aspect, and that is not common in this game. So Vigilance is high up there in the S tier, in my opinion, one of the strongest legendaries in the game. Next up, we have Devastator. Devastator, I'm going to put here in the B tier. So Devastator has a kind of similar role to Avenger. It's sort of an endgame closer win condition type card. But the thing about Devastator is that it's more expensive, it can be a little more difficult to make work, and it ends up being more of a sideboard type option a lot of the time, whereas Avenger is more of a main deck card. So Devastator is going to be in the B tier. It's still a good card, but it struggles a little more to get going compared to Avenger. And we're going to put Home 1 similarly in the B tier. It can be a good way to get some unit recursion and get a lot of restore going and develop a nice endgame threat, but at the same time, Home 1 is, it's not something that everyone wants to play. A lot of these decks that can play it end up trying to close the game sooner or similar, and it isn't quite at that same power level as something like Avenger. Next up, we have Command. So Command kind of deserves to be an S tier. Because I do think that if you're running double green, you're almost certainly running Command. So it does have that auto include aspect to it, but Command is so much weaker, in my opinion, than the other double aspect legendaries that I am actually going to bump it down to A tier. And the reason for this is actually really simple. Command relative to the other double aspect legendaries has one mode that doesn't consistently function. And the fact that it's so the damage mode on command says non-unique unit. And unfortunately, so many units are unique in this game, including a bunch of the best units, that this is a massive downside, and it means that command's damage function is sometimes just sort of randomly off because your opponent happens to have only played unique units. Like, let's say you're playing against a Sabine deck. Turn 1, they play Sabine Ran Explosives Artist. Turn 2, they play Red 3. Both of those are unique. Now, if you're playing command on turn 4, you don't have a target. So I think if command said non-leader instead of non-unique, I would put it in the S tier. But as it stands, it feels like it's a step behind the other double aspect legendaries, at least to me. There are players I respect who have a higher opinion of this card than I do, but I am going to put it in the S tier. Spoiler alert, the other double aspect legendaries, in fact, we may as well just do this now. The other double aspect legendaries are in S tier. They're really, really, really good. And I want to put command a bit lower. I do think it's basically auto-include if you're playing double green, maybe. I mean, double green, but double green is also kind of the worst double aspect combination, at least that we've seen thus far, in my opinion. And one of the main reasons for that is the weakness of command, in my opinion. So I'm not going to put command on the same tier as the other ones. I'm not saying it's a bad card. When I say weakness, that's only relative weakness. It's still a good card, but all the other double aspect cards are like super crazy, far above normal power level, and command is not that. Command is merely somewhat above normal power level. Force Lightning. Force Lightning is a weird one. On paper, this card looks really good. In practice, I don't see it very often. I think I'm going to put it in the C tier, and it's going to be the first of the cards that goes there. And I want to give a major caveat. So the main reason that I have Force Lightning in the C tier is that it seems like it hasn't really found its place. I could see a world where in the future we have a lot more Force units, especially ones that work well in villainy decks, and I could see this being bumped up to B or A or maybe even S tier depending on what happens, but right now it feels like Force Lightning doesn't have the support structure that it needs to be anything other than a rather conditional card. And it's kind of a shame because Force Lightning is a great counter to some cards that are quite prevalent. For instance, it's one of the best counters to Super Laser Tech, or at least it would be if you could reliably get an early force unit so that you can actually push damage through. But unfortunately, right now, that doesn't seem to be where we're at. So the Force Lightning is going to be the first C tier card. I'm not saying it's a terrible card, but it feels like a very situational include at this point, and maybe a future villain force deck will change that. And Force Lightning will be joined here actually by Black 1. So Black 1 is an interesting card. When played and when defeated, it allows you to redraw a hand of 4 cards and discard your previous hand, which can be a really good ability in the right situation. But the fact that it's an expensive card and has terrible stats for cost, I believe it's a 6-cost 4/4 in space. That's really, really bad. So you're really playing it for that redraw your hand. And honestly, a lot of decks, if they're playing on curve, don't really go that low on hand size. So I've found that this card can be quite effective if you're playing like a Han 1 red, for instance, and you're using Han's ability and getting cards out of your hand and playing stuff out. Or maybe if you're playing a deck where everything is very cheap and you're burning through all your cards in hand and then you play Black 1 to refill. It does have a role. I'm not saying it doesn't have a role, but it's kind of situational and specific. And ultimately, that's going to be another C tier legendary, as is Mace Windu here. So Mace Windu is not that bad on paper, but he seems overshadowed by some of the other 7-cost, kill a thing, and then you have a body unit. So like Luke and Vader seem much stronger than Mace Windu. So Han Solo Reluctant Hero seems much stronger than Mace Windu, even though he's not a legendary. And overall, I'm not saying Mace Windu's bad again, but he doesn't quite seem to have found his place. I'm wondering if he's going to do better in the upcoming set. Right now, it feels like he's not really what Hero Red wants to be doing. Hero Red is usually very aggro and often doesn't even resource to 7. And while I understand that Mace Windu can pick off a unit ready and then attack the base, which does make him more aggro than some of those other 7-cost legendary units, it seems like the general general consensus at this point is that that's a capability that seems to be a capability that Hero Red doesn't need, at least in the current decks, and people have kind of shied away from playing him. Not saying he's terrible, but he seems to be infrequently played. I think his best use is probably in Han 1 Red as well. Now this one's going to be controversial because Boba Fett Disintegrator would be S tier if I were making this video during set 1. But two big things have happened that have actually made me demote him not only from S to A, but actually from A to B. And, you know, oh, how the mighty have fallen. But Boba Fett Disintegrator, the thing about him is there have been two big changes. The first change was there was an actual rulebook change that made it so that his ability was less effective against leaders. Towards the end of set 1, they changed it so that leader units are considered to have entered play on the turn that they deploy. Previously, the ruling was that leaders are always in play and they don't enter play when they deployed. They were in play from the start of the game, and that meant that Boba Fett Disintegrator's on-attack ability could always work against leaders, even on the turn that they just deployed. And so that made him substantially more powerful at answering certain leader flips. You could send him in from ECL and you could do a bunch of damage via you could send him in via ECL and do a bunch of damage and like take out 6 HP leaders immediately like Leia or Han after they attack, but that's changed and that capability isn't there anymore. But the other change that might be more significant is that Boba Fett used to be the only 3-cost 3/5 unit in the game, and that was very powerful. But in set 2, we got a bunch more 3-cost 3/5 units, and some of them are probably better than Boba. So, you know, even if you're playing a villain deck, even if you're playing a cunning villain deck, I think there are some decks that should be playing Toro Calican over Boba Fett Disintegrator. I think Toro does the same job better in some cases. The job of being a 3-cost 3/5 that has a relevant ability to what your deck is trying to do. If you're playing a more aggro type deck, I think Toro can sometimes be better, especially with cards like the Hotshot Deal 44 Blaster or with Cunning. And then the other thing is other decks have also received cards that allow them to have those same stats. So Cassian Andor, for those heroism aggression decks, Cassian has the same stat line and an incredibly strong ability for when he's smuggled. And even cards like DJ, Liberated Slaves, we're now at the point where 3-cost 3/5 isn't a really dramatic, impressive stat line anymore. It's something that a bunch of units have, and for that reason, I don't think that Boba Fett Disintegrator is that impressive anymore. And I'm not saying he's a bad card. I'm not saying, oh, it's ridiculous to play him. I think it's quite correct for a bunch of decks to play him, especially decks with Boba Fett's armor. He gives another target for that upgrade. But what he does is not so unique anymore. His stat line is not so crazy anymore, and he's not like in a class of his own anymore. I think now he is a solid option, whereas previously he was kind of the best unit in his category by a lot, and so he's going to end up in the B tier for me. The Falcon is going to be in the S tier. The Falcon is so good. So the Falcon has, not only does it have a good stat line for its cost at 3-cost 3/4 in space, it also comes into play ready, which is super good. It's one of the strongest abilities in the game. I should probably like bump. I'm only like loosely doing power level here, but like Falcon's up there somewhere. It's really strong. Yeah, I mean, so it's great against early fighters and stuff. If you're like, I had a game recently at the SFPQ where it was some kind of aggro mirror. Turn 1, we each play a 2-drop unit. Turn 2, my opponent plays red 3. I play the Falcon and I kill his red 3, and my Falcon stays on the board, and I'm feeling real good about that trade. You know what I mean? The Falcon's very good against early ships. It's very good just as an aggro unit on its own. It does have an upkeep cost, but you can refuse to play the cost and bounce it to your hand, which is in some cases actually good. For instance, if your opponent puts negative upgrades on it, like bounty upgrades, or if they put entrenched on it to try to prevent it from attacking, you can return it to hand. Entrenched falls off, and then you replay it. You can intentionally let it go back to hand if you're playing against a hard control deck and think they're going to super laser blast you. It just has a lot of options, and it's a really strong card. I overall think it's, you know, sometimes Cunning Heroism gets a bad rap, but I think the Millennium Falcon is one of the better cards that Cunning Heroism has going for it. Change of Heart next up. This is going to be a B tier type card. This is a bit more situational, but it's definitely seen more play than some of these ones down here on the C tier. Normally what this is used for is kind of an end game card where maybe your opponent has developed that Avenger or some other really powerful thing. You take the initiative, first action, Change of Heart. Now maybe they have something to play to remove their own unit, but if so, you just got a 2-for-1, and if not, you get to use their powerful unit against them. And it can be especially strong for Palpatine, where he can then sacrifice the unit that he captured in order to deal more damage and draw a card. There are a lot of nice interactions with it, but it isn't something that is necessarily a main deck type card, and it's only seen kind of situational play, so it is going to end up in the B tier. Okay, so I believe that that is all 16 of the original set's legendaries. And the original set's legendaries are pretty good. We have a few here in the C tier, but even these ones in the C tier are kind of situational cards where in the right circumstances they could be good, and the question is just how often do those circumstances arise? So I think, all in all, I would say that the legendary cards from set 1, Spark of Rebellion, are really successful as a whole. And I think that most of these cards are things that you would want in at least some deck. Even these ones that are kind of B tier include cards that are quite valuable and quite strong. And even these ones in the C tier I could see becoming stronger in the future. Now we're going to go to set 2's legendaries. So first up, we have Supreme Leader Snoke. Snoke, I think, is an A tier card. He's kind of similar to, Super Laser Blast and Avenger here as being a... He's kind of an endgame win condition-y type of card. He notably locks down a bunch of your opponent's cards immediately once you play him. So if the opponent has units that have 2 HP or less, those units are now just dead. They can't play them or they die immediately. He makes a lot of smaller units, even ones that aren't dead, more or less irrelevant. So all those like 2/3s and like small ships and stuff all of a sudden can't do damage on attack. He debuffs even stronger units and makes it easier for you to take trades. He basically just sets up a very favorable scenario for you. But like Avenger and Super Laser Blast, I wouldn't put him in the S tier because he is an endgame card. Only some types of builds want to run cards like this. And also, he's actually weak into other big control decks. This is something interesting that I found when I was doing some testing with Double Blue Iden. Snoke's ability just isn't really that important against decks that are only running big win condition units. He's best when the opponent is trying to send in a bunch of small units to get through your defenses and so on. And as a result of that, I have Snoke in the A tier, not in the S tier. That's one of those things. So next up, we have Rey. Rey is... I have seen people play Rey, but to be honest with you, I think she's really bad. Yeah, I'm actually gonna I would put her in the D, okay, I am gonna put her in the D tier. I was gonna say I would put her in the C tier because I've seen people playing her, but I think those people are wrong, so I'm gonna just put her in the D tier. And if you're a Rey fan, I'm sorry, but so Rey is a 5-cost unit with no immediate board impact. She has this ability that allows you to play her in a Kylo deck, which is nice and characterful, but the problem is that you don't want to because she's not a good card. On attack, you can heal 2 damage from a unit, and if it's a non-heroism unit, you can give it a shield. That's kind of cool, except again, she's a 5-cost unit with no immediate board impact, and if you do play her in Kylo, you need to be red-blue, which means that you can't play Energy Conversion Lab, which would be the main thing that would make me want to play a card like this, so it's just very awkward. Yeah, I mean, she does have Force. So I've seen her get played in like a Han 2 blue deck, and they play her as a 4-cost 4/5 that takes 2 damage, and then when she attacks, she can heal herself and become a 4/7 again. And even then I'm unsure if that's even good or if you should just run Kanan instead. I think I'm personally on team just run Kanan instead. Maybe I'm wrong. I could see her getting bumped up to the C tier. But I don't think units like this are very good, unfortunately. I'm gonna leave her in the D tier for now. And she's actually going to be joined there by the Mandalorian. And I know this is kind of unfair to the Mandalorian because the Mandalorian actually has good stats for cost. He's a 6-cost 5/6 Sentinel. And when played, you may heal all damage from a unit that costs 2 or less and give it 2 shields. And that seems really good in theory. And the problem with the Mandalorian is that there are other cards that do this same role better of being the big 6-cost Sentinel. And as a result, he sees almost no play. The people have spoken and they prefer Obi-Wan's stronger ability much over the Mandalorian's one extra power. And I think that if the Mandalorian trait synergy had landed, I could easily see this card being better. He's not a bad card on paper, but in practice, he currently seems to have basically no home. We're going to put him in C tier. We're going to put him in C tier. He seems similar to Black One and stuff like that. And in fact, I even think he's maybe better than Black One. But the problem with him is until there's Mandalorian synergy or some other reason to make him additionally desirable, people just play Obi-Wan instead. And it's unfortunate because he is a cool character, it's a cool card, but it just doesn't seem to have found a place. I think that Set 2's Mandalorian synergy in general unfortunately turned out to be pretty weak, and we don't see much of it seeing play, and the Mandalorian unit card is maybe a victim of that. I think in a world where the Mandalorian synergy were very strong, we would definitely see him seeing more play. But as it stands, it kind of feels like Bo-Katan is the new Hera, and it's more of a theme deck. And I would play him in that deck. I think he's cool in that deck, but like for most decks that are trying to be competitive, they should probably just play Obi-Wan. Okay, Second Chance. This is going to be in the D tier. So this is a 4-cost double blue upgrade. It attaches to a non-leader unit, and the unit gains when defeated. For this phase, the unit's owner can play it from the discard pile for free. So that sounds kind of good in theory. It has multiple big problems, though. First off, it's an expensive upgrade in a world where people are running a lot of upgrade removal. That means, so if you play this and your opponent plays Confiscate on it, they defeated your 4-cost card with a 1-cost card. If you play this and your opponent plays Disabling Fangfighter, they are a resource up on you and they're a unit up on you. Additionally, if you play this and the opponent bounces the unit you played it on, you lose your expensive upgrades. So that's kind of a problem. Some expensive upgrades get around this by being able to be played on leaders, but Second Chance can't be played on a leader. So it kind of has to expose itself to being vulnerable to bounce. Additionally, the timing is bad. So when defeated for this phase, the unit's owner may play it from their discard pile for free. The problem with this is if they defeat your unit after you've taken the initiative, you lose the opportunity to play it from the discard pile. And this was the big problem with Cobb Vanth. Cobb Vanth in previews looked like he was going to be an amazing card. In practice, he's pretty rarely played, and I think the main reason for that is that Cobb Vanth's ability requires you to take an action to play the card from the discard pile. If Cobb Vanth put the card that he gets to play for free into play directly, he would be far better. But as it stands, if you take the initiative and then the opponent kills Cobb Vanth, his ability essentially is a dud because you don't have the ability to actually take an action and play the card that is now discarded. And Second Chance has the same problem. I basically don't know of anyone playing this card. I think that it's been kind of a flub, unfortunately. So it is going to be in the D tier here. Finalizer. This is an 11-cost 11/11 with Overwhelm, and when played, you can choose any number of friendly units, and each of those captures an enemy unit in the same arena. This is also a D-tier card. The capture mechanic has not landed competitively. Almost no capture cards see any competitive play at all. The only one that I have seen in competitive play is Relentless Pursuit, and even that has increasingly become more of a sideboard card and not that widely played. Finalizer also costs 11. Devastator costs 10 and is probably better than Finalizer. In general, I think Finalizer has kind of just turned out to be too expensive, and it seems to be it relies on a mechanic that isn't popular, and it seems to be doing a similar role to Devastator, but perhaps less effectively. It's unfortunate, but right now I don't think that Finalizer is a very strong card, and I have not much seen anyone using it. Rule with Respect, also to the D tier, unfortunately. So 4-cost event, and a friendly unit captures each enemy non-leader unit that attacked your base this phase. Once again, the capture mechanic has not landed competitively. But this card has another problem, which is in theory, you get to capture a bunch of enemy cards with 1 card. That sounds really good. The problem is, if aggro is attacking your base with a bunch of units, you're probably already losing the game. Additionally, if you capture all those cards with 1 card, and then your opponent kills that 1 card, they get all their stuff back. So the timing's bad because they have to already attack you. The effect is good in theory, but then in practice, if they just kill the unit that did the capturing, they get all their stuff back. I think it's pretty bad. Endless Legions. Endless Legions is one of the highest power level cards in the game. It also costs 14 and is in double green, which is probably the worst double aspect combo. And in general, I'm not sure that you will ever play this. I'm going to put it in C tier because I think it's better than these cards that are in the D tier, because if you could make a deck that could get to 14 resources and play Endless Legions reliably, or had some way to play it early, it would potentially be very, very strong. And it is genuinely a huge payoff in a way that I think some other cards are not. However, in practice, I'm putting it towards the bottom of C tier because I don't know of any deck that can actually do that. And in practice, this card more or less, I have not seen much of it. It's really cool. And, maybe someday there's going to be a deck that can actually get to 14 in double green and fire off Endless Legions, but it doesn't seem to be there right now. Next up, we have the Darksaber. The Darksaber actually sees quite widespread play, and I'm going to put it here in the A tier, I think. So the thing about Darksaber that makes it not S tier to me is that it's extremely vulnerable to upgrade removal. And I was discussing this a bit earlier when we talked about Second Chance, but with Darksaber, the problem is a little better because you do get to play the Darksaber on a leader. And indeed, the main use of the Darksaber seems to be right now playing it on Sabine. And if you play these upgrades on leaders, you're not vulnerable to losing it to bounce, but you're still vulnerable to the Confiscate, the disabling Fangfighter. And because of Darksaber and Boba Fett's armor both being very strong upgrades, we have seen people even main decking Confiscate and Fangfighter. And as a result of that, I think the Darksaber ends up being not an S tier card, which I might like in a world where upgrade removal didn't exist. Darksaber would probably be an S tier card. As it stands, the counters do exist. People are running them. And as a result, some people have been opting off of the Darksaber, even though it's really good, because they don't want to play into the counters. So that includes me. At the SFPQ this last weekend, I personally did not play Darksaber, even though I was running a Sabine deck. And yeah, I think ultimately the Darksaber is a quite strong card. In fact, I'll probably even put it above. I'd put it relatively high in A tier. It can be very overwhelming when it does get going, but because of its vulnerability to upgrade removal and to a lesser extent to exhaust effects, I do actually think that it is not an S tier card. I'm going to put it in the A tier here. Kylo's TIE Silencer. This is going to shock some people. I think Kylo's TIE Silencer is S tier, and Kylo's TIE Silencer is not dramatic, super crazy power level. It doesn't do something so incredible that everybody is like, whoa, that's a crazy effect. Nothing else in the game does that. Kylo's TIE Silencer doesn't do that. But what Kylo's TIE Silencer does is it offers a stat line that is very, very efficient. It is a 2-cost 3/2, and it not only has no downside, it actually has an upside. And people right now, 2-cost 3/2 in space is competitive even with a major downside. So Mercenary Gunship, that unit sees a bunch of play in competitive decks, despite the fact that it has a major downside. In fact, at the SFPQ this last weekend, I had a game where the card that did the most damage to my opponent's base was my opponent's Mercenary Gunship, which I stole from them on the 4-resource turn and was able to swing into the base repeatedly with to do a bunch of damage. So if people are playing a 2-cost 3/2 with a very major downside, a 2-cost 3/2 with no downside and actually a big upside is very strong in my opinion. And it's not flashy. It's not, for a lot of decks, they don't really have a reliable way to get much benefit out of its action, but Kylo does, and for him it's amazing. And even for decks that don't have a way to consistently get value out of that action, being a 2-cost 3/2 with no downside is very strong. And so I do think Kylo's TIE Silencer is an S tier card. Next up, we're going to have Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren gets to be C tier, whereas Rey was D tier. And the reason for that is that Kylo Ren is good with Energy Conversion Lab in a villain deck. But like Rey, Kylo suffers from having this thematic ability that allows you to play him in a Rey deck and ignore his villain aspect penalty. But there isn't really that good a thing to do with it, which is the problem. He has the same issue as Rey. He's an expensive unit with no immediate board impact. He's good if you ambush him, but if you play him in Rey, then you've on blue and red, and that means that you don't have Energy Conversion Lab, and heroic or timely interventions out of aspect and so on. So I think the best use for Kylo is boringly in a red-green deck with Energy Conversion Lab. His on-attack ability allows you to buff a unit, and if it's a non-villain unit, you also give it an experience, and that's cool, but the best use of it is probably to just buff him directly, go to Strength 8, and ambush someone's leader and kill them. It's unfortunate. It's a cool card. It's a thematic card, but he doesn't seem to be a very strong card, in my opinion, and I don't normally see him in builds. I'm going to put him in the C tier here. Next up, we have Poe Dameron. Poe Dameron is very good. Poe Dameron is... I'm going to put him in high A tier. The thing that holds Poe Dameron out of the S tier is that he is an expensive card with no immediate board impact. He is very good if you ambush him, and he's very good if you play him early, and sometimes he's even so good that you can play him for 5 resources with no tricks and no spicy effects, and he's still good in that context. But he isn't consistently good in that context. He's normally good with an ambush or with, being played a turn early by young Han or whatever. And as a result of that, I don't have him in the S tier because, you can look at these Sabine decks, and Sabine Green loves Poe. It's one of the best cards in Sabine Green. But for the Sabine decks that don't have Energy Conversion Lab, Poe is honestly often not played. And so SFPQ, I was running Cunning Sabine. I didn't have Poe in my build. When I play Double Red Sabine, I don't have Poe in my build. I'm not saying Poe is a bad card, but being an expensive card with no immediate board impact is a major problem, especially for aggro, and it is keeping him from being an auto include, and it's keeping him in the A tier instead of the S tier. He's high A tier. He's really good. He's probably the best of the 5 cost, like, this unit's really strong but doesn't do anything immediately units. He's probably the best one of those in the game, but that category of unit is flawed enough that as a kind of basic concept that he ends up being, in my opinion, high A tier instead of being S tier, despite the fact that his actual power level when he's ambushed and stuff is really high. So if you're playing a deck with Energy Conversion Lab, Poe is S tier for sure. But for all the decks that aren't, he isn't really all that good. And that's not to say that he's terrible, but ultimately I'm going to put him in the A tier. Next up is the Crate Dragon. Crate Dragon is probably A or B tier, depending on how generous I'm feeling with it. I think I'm going to put Crate Dragon in A tier. So Crate Dragon is like Avenger, like Snoke, like Super Laser Blast in terms of being a big end game closer win condition unit. And like the rest of those, I think it can take over the game. I've had games where the opponent plays Crate Dragon and I'm like, oh, I'm done. Gotta concede. That's it. There's nothing else that I can do here. If I don't have a good counter to it, it's now locked out a huge number of my plays, and my opponent can just win the game quickly with basic attacks from it. But I've also had games where someone plays a Crate Dragon and, I play Fell the Dragon or whatever. But I think that ultimately it's in a similar state to Avengers, Super Laser Blast, or Avengers and Snoke in being late game win condition cards for control decks. And, he does the job well. I think I'm going to put it here in the A tier. Dryden Voss, or Dryden Vos, or however you pronounce that. This is a unfortunate card. Dryden is really good in a world where capture is good. We are not in a world where capture is good. I'm going to put Dryden in the C tier. There's an argument that he should actually be in the D tier because of how much capture is not seen as a competitive mechanic. But I think that his power level is actually very high if capture ever ends up being good. So he gets to be towards the bottom of C tier. And I think he's in a similar state to like the Mandalorian or Forced Lightning So the Mandalorian might be good if Mandalorian synergies become good. Force Lightning might be good if we see better early game dark side Force users. And Dryden Voss is in a similar state. In a world where capture is good, Dryden Voss is a very cool card, but we don't seem to be in that world right now. And so Dryden Voss ends up here in the C tier, in my opinion. Final Showdown. This is also going to be a C tier card. This card potentially wins the game. I've had it win the game for me before in Limited. But it doesn't seem to be making its way into competitive decks at this time. I'm not entirely sure why. It does seem to me that a like double yellow Boba deck could potentially win the game off of Final Showdown, and it seems at least somewhat worth trying. But you know, I'm not a big double yellow Boba player. I know there's a bunch of other people who have been playing that, and I think that it's entirely possible to me that the other options that already exist for those colors are just better or something. Or you know, maybe the deck is just too crowded. So I'm gonna put him in the C tier for now. DJ should. So DJ is a special case. If your leader is Han 1, DJ is arguably S tier. Because you can do the Tech DJ combo. If you're playing double yellow Han, you can play DJ for 7. It's just really, he's just really, really good. And then with that original Han, you can then end up destroying the resource that you stole and permanently deramping your opponent. And even if they kill DJ, they don't get their resource back. That's amazing. It's really, really good. And we've seen DJ being widely played by those decks. He's also a 3-cost 3/5. However, in every other deck, his ability is a lot worse because if the opponent kills him, they get their resource back. And there are fringe scenarios where you manage to play their resource via smuggle or whatever it was, and so that doesn't work. But overall, yeah, DJ is really weird. I think I end up putting DJ like high in B tier, with the caveat that if you're playing set 1 Han, he should probably be S tier. But for other decks, he's like good but not great, largely played for stats. His ability might be disruptive, but it's like not reliably effective. Han 1 puts him in like a totally different state because of the ability to destroy the resource that DJ steals. And then prevent the opponent from getting it back. But generally speaking, maybe I should say he's A tier because he's S tier for some and B tier otherwise. I'm gonna put him in B tier for now. I think, you know, you could maybe compare him to Boba in terms of they're both 3-cost 3/5s, and they have good abilities, but DJ's ability is much better in some decks than others. Boba would probably be the better of the two in most decks, and then DJ would be the better of the two if you have Han 1. And we'll see if there's other combos in the future with DJ, but right now I'm going to say that he's a high B tier. And then last of these set 2 legendaries, we have Evacuate, which bounces every non-leader unit. This card doesn't really seem to have a place right now, but it's not something like fundamentally bad or crazy. I'm going to put it in the C tier here. Again, I'm not saying it's bad. It just doesn't seem to have really found a place. I could easily see, like, if this card were seeing like a bunch of play in sideboards, I would say it's B tier, but it's not really right now. But it doesn't seem like an unplayable effect that deserves to be in D tier. It seems to be. I have it in the C tier right now, and I think that's appropriate. So there's a little pattern here that you might have noticed, and that is that all the D tier cards are set 2. Almost all the S tier cards are set 1. In general, the set 1 legendaries were a lot more successful than the set 2 legendaries. So set 2, you know, here we have Kylo's TIE Silencer, we have Poe, we have Darksaber, we have Snoke, we have Crate Dragon. Okay, you know, that's not looking so bad. There's like 5 of them up there in A and S tier. But you know, if we look at the set 1 cards, almost all of them are in these top 3 tiers, and then we have a few in C tier. If we look at set 2, the entire D tier is set 2. There's a bunch of C tier set 2. Ultimately, it feels to me like set 2's legendaries were substantially weaker than set 1's, which I think has been unfortunate. But let's take a look at the set 3 legendaries now. I'm not going to put them on this tier list directly because we haven't really had the testing that we would need to accurately determine some of this stuff, but I want to go over them real fast and talk about where I might predict them to be. So this is my tier list for the legendaries in the game right now. I'll probably update this later. And let's take a look at set 3's legendaries. So first up, we have now there are 2 of them. 3 cost Cunning Event. If you control exactly 1 unit, play a non-vehicle unit from your hand that shares a trait with the unit you control. It costs 5 less. This card is super good. This is like... So you have to have set up the trait synergies properly. But I think the ideal with this is that turn 1, you play a 2-cost unit that has a relevant trait. Turn 2, you play now there are 2 of them, and you play a 5-cost unit on turn 2. And you have to have the right unit. You have to have the situation lining up correctly, but that's fundamentally extremely strong. And I think this is a very, very good card, good enough that you're going to want to build around it to some degree and make a deck where you can really support getting these powerful plays running. So now there are 2 of them. I'm very positive on this card. If I were to put it in the tier list right now, it would probably be A or S, depending on how easy it's going to prove to deck build in a way that allows you to fire this consistently. I could see a world in which like the traits don't always line up, and the fact that it doesn't work on vehicles is enough of an obstacle that it only ends up in some decks, but I'm pretty sure that in the decks where it does end up, it's going to be very, very strong. So I would predict an A or S for this card. Chancellor Palpatine, Wartime Chancellor, double yellow, 4-cost, ground unit 2/6. Each token unit you create enters play ready. That's quite good. On attack, if a unit left play this phase, create a clone trooper token. Also quite good, especially because it enters play ready. Where do I put Chancellor Palpatine? I don't know. So double cunning tokens is not an archetype that exists right now. But he seems like he could be a huge linchpin card for that archetype in a world where it does end up being any good. Right now, I would probably put him in B tier because I don't really know, and he seems like he only is going to work with some kind of specific strategies, but I could see him being strong enough in those decks that he ends up being A tier. Really not sure. We'll need some more testing. Ahsoka Tano, always ready for trouble. 3-cost, Cunning Heroism 3/4, Force Jedi Republic. While you control fewer units than an opponent, including this unit, that's important, this unit gains ambush. So if you play Ahsoka, and so let's say your opponent has 1 unit and you have 0 units. They have fewer units than you. But if you play Ahsoka, you now both have 1 unit and she doesn't get ambush. On the other hand, if they have 2 units and you have 0 units and you play Ahsoka, they still have more units than you and you get to ambush one of those units. Also, as an action, you can spend 2 to return this unit and each upgrade on her to their owner's hands. This allows you to potentially bounce her and get out of trouble in the right situation. Maybe you see that a Super Laser Blast is coming in soon and you're like, nope, I want Ahsoka off the field. I want to be able to replay her after this Super Laser Blast. Well, there you have it. Maybe the opponent puts a negative bounty on her, and you want to bounce her. They do get their bounty back, but they'll have to replay it later. Maybe, you know, there are a few uses for this. The fact that it costs 2 is a little clunky. I'm not entirely sure how often that ability is going to get used, but 3 for a 3/4 is at least a decent stat line, even if there are 3/5s now. And the fact that she will sometimes have ambush is very strong because ambush is a really good keyword. The question to me is how often you will be outnumbered such that you get that ambush, but in a set with a lot of token units, I could see her getting a pretty good result. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So overall, I think Ahsoka Tano is going to be a pretty good card. Right now, I would say she's probably going to end up A or B tier. If she ends up more reliable than I'm initially thinking with that ambush, she might even be S tier. But right now, I don't think she's going to be a total auto include. We will have to see. Cad Bane Hostage Taker. I really don't know how to rate this guy. I have a lot of uncertainty on this guy. He's a 7-cost 7/7 Cunning Villainy. He is a ground unit. When played, this unit captures up to 3 enemy non-leader units with a total of 8 or less remaining HP. On attack, the defending player may rescue a card they own guarded by this unit, and if they do, draw 2 cards. So when you first play him, he potentially captures a bunch of enemy units, but then when he attacks, the opponent can take their units back, but then if they do, you get to draw. There's a lot. I have a lot of uncertainty about whether or not this is good. Right now, I think he probably will be good, but Other capture cards haven't been that good, but he's more dramatic. I mean, this is one of my highest uncertainty cards. I wouldn't be surprised. I could easily see him being, anywhere. I could conceivably even see him being S tier, but I could see him being anywhere from like C to S. I don't think he's D. And a lot of uncertainty with this one. I hope he ends up being good. I like the art. I like the concept, but it's a very weird effect. It's kind of an opponent's choice effect. I really don't know. Planetary Invasion, 12 cost aggression event, exploit 3, ready up to 3 units. Each of those units gets +1 power and gains overwhelm for this phase. I really dislike this card. I think it's probably going to be really bad. I don't know for sure. Right now, I would say it's probably going to be D tier. That would be my prediction, but I could see a world where it's C or even B. The problem with this card is it's really, really, really expensive. So you want to play it with exploit to make it not really expensive, but let's say you exploit 3 and play this for 6, then you ready up to 3 units. So you had to have 3 units that you had to have 3 units exhausted to ready and buff with this, in addition to the 3 units that you killed with it. A board of 6 units is just not very common in this game. Maybe this set is going to allow you to go super wide. I don't know. I'm very skeptical of this card. I think it will likely be bad. We will have to see, but I'm going to be surprised if this ends up being really powerful. Unlimited Power, 6 cost double red event. Deal 4 damage to a unit, 3 damage to a second unit, 2 damage to a third unit, and 1 damage to a fourth unit, all damage dealt simultaneously. The theoretical ceiling of this card is very, very high. The problem with this card is that you have to hit your own units with it if you don't have enough enemy targets. So let's say there's a situation where both sides have 2 units. You cannot play Unlimited Power and only pick their unit for the 4 and their unit for the 3. You also have to assign the third and fourth targets there, and they have to be your own units. I think that's a really big downside. And I think that right now you should probably just play the double red Rancor if you want this effect. I could be wrong. Unlimited Power does allow you to hit targets in space. This is going to be a set where people go wider. Maybe that's going to be enough to make this card good. As it stands, the ceiling is high, but the clunky way that you have to assign the damage, in my opinion, means this is probably going to end up being weak. I think it will likely end up being C or D tier. Could be wrong. Resolute under Anakin's command, 10 cost aggression heroism space unit, 8/8 Republic vehicle capital ship, costs 1 less to play for every 5 damage on your base, and when played or on attack, deal 2 damage to an enemy unit and each other enemy unit with the same name as that unit. This is a card that I'm very high uncertainty on because I have no idea how good token strategies are going to be. If token strategies are good, this is an excellent answer to them. If token strategies are bad, this card seems like it's probably going to be too clunky. I really don't know. It's expensive, but then also it has a built-in way to discount it. Its stats are bad for the cost, but they might be better if you're playing this for 7 or 8. And then the when played and on attack is amazing against tokens, but it's not very good against non-tokens, but it's not useless against non-tokens either. It could be quite solid in that context. A lot of uncertainty on this card. If I had to pick right now, I would say B, but I could see it being higher or lower. Difficult to say. Darth Maul, Revenge at Last. Love this guy. 5 cost aggression villainy ground unit, 5/6. This unit can attack 2 units instead of 1. He deals his combat damage to both defenders, and they both deal their combat damage to this unit, and all damage is dealt simultaneously. Okay, so he has a problem that I've talked about before. He's an expensive unit with no immediate board impact. However, he works really well with ambush. He also works really well with leader Maul to potentially give him overwhelm. I think that the situations where you can give him those buffs are good enough that he will probably be B tier or maybe even A tier. In the world where he ends up being really strong, I think he's similar to Poe, where he's in A tier instead of S tier because he is ambush reliant. So I don't think he's going to end up being S, and I don't know whether he'll be A or B. I suspect he will be either A or B. I don't think he's going to be C or D, just because this is a strong effect that you can't really get anything, and you can't really get anything like this elsewhere exactly. Gora, Grievous's Pet, 12 cost command ground unit, 7/7 separatist creature, and it has a huge pile of keywords. Exploit 3, Sentinel, Ambush, and Overwhelm. Okay, so like a lot of exploit cards, this is bad if you play it for 12. But if you play it for 6 and discard 3 battle droids that aren't really very good, this could be really scary. How good is he actually going to be? I have no idea. This card is high uncertainty for me. I don't know how good battle droids are going to be. I don't know how good exploit is going to be. I don't know where this is going to end up at all. If I were to guess, I would guess B, because I think it's going to be good in exploit decks and bad in not exploit decks, and therefore it's going to kind of sort itself into certain builds. But I could be, maybe it turns out that this is not a very good exploit target compared to other stuff. Maybe it turns out that exploit is really easy to do in a super powerful archetype. I really am not certain on this one. I think it's a very cool card. I hope it ends up being good, but we'll have to see. Clone, 7-cost ground unit command. It has the cunning trait. It has the command aspect, 0/0 clone trait. You may have this unit interplay as a copy of a non-leader, non-vehicle unit in play, except that it gains the clone trait and is not unique. Only the card's printed attributes are copied. So you can play this and get it, like, let's say your opponent just played Vader. You can play a clone and make it a Vader. In fact, let's say you have Vader, you can play a clone and have another Vader. Or you can have Supreme Leader Snoke in play and play clone and get a second Supreme Leader Snoke, and the second one is cheaper and it's not unique and their abilities stack, and now the opponent's board has -4/-4. That's very, very strong. So the thing about clone, though, is that I think they were a little conservative with the pricing. I think probably this could have cost 6 and it would be fine. The thing about this effect is that it is very situational, because there has to be a unit in play that is a good target for it. And as a result, I think 7 is a little too expensive, even though you are going to be copying powerful 7-cost cards with this sometimes. I don't know. It feels like they went a little conservative on the power level of this card. So I do think it's going to see play, but I think it's mostly going to see play in decks that themselves are playing expensive, strong units, because I think that you aren't necessarily going to be able to rely on your opponent having a card that is worth cloning with clone at 7 cost. If it cost less, that might be a different story. But at 7 cost, I think it'll likely end up being about B tier. Could be wrong. We'll have to see. Pyrrhic Assault, 3-cost double command event. For this phase, each friendly unit gains when defeated, deal 2 damage to an enemy unit. When this card first came out, I thought it was crazy because I incorrectly thought it was 2 damage to an enemy unit or base. It is not. So basically what this lets you do is do very efficient trading. Like, you have a bunch of units, you play this, and now your weak units can attack into an enemy unit, they get defeated, and then you get to deal 2 damage to an enemy unit in order to make some of that up. This could be really good with a swarm of battle droids. Are those swarm decks going to be good enough? And is this going to be... It is kind of narrow, because the thing that it basically does is allow you to get disproportionate value in unit combat out of a wide board. How good are wide decks going to be, and how often will they need like that big push for unit combat? I honestly don't know. As it stands, I could see this card. I think this card will likely be B or C tier, and it could maybe even be D tier if this type of thing just ends up being totally irrelevant. But I think it will likely, I think if I had to guess, I would say C, but I could be wrong. Isla Secura, Master of the Blade, 5-cost 6/5, command heroism ground unit, Force Jedi Republic, coordinate on attack, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to this unit for this attack. So expensive unit with no immediate board impact. Her ability is good, but is itself situational because it relies on coordinate. I think she will end up being played in decks that can ambush her. I think she will not be strong in decks that can't ambush her, and I don't know why she doesn't have the Twilight trait. Yeah, so ultimately I would say that I think Isla is probably, I think I probably end up putting her in B tier. I suspect she will see substantial play from decks that can ambush her in, but I think that ultimately, I don't know. Ultimately, I think that her base power level is not all that good, and she's going to be reliant on ambush to get value. And then ideally, you have to set up coordinate as well, which to me means that she's probably going to end up being a B tier card. I could even see her being a C tier card if people decide other options are better for their ECL and so on. I don't think she's likely to be A tier, but maybe if coordinate's way better than I think, she could end up being up there. We'll have to see. The Invasion of Christophsis. I really like this card. Okay, so 15-cost vigilance event, exploit 4. Choose an opponent, defeat each unit that player controls. So in the dream scenario, you have like 4 battle droid tokens or something really bad, and you get rid of 4 of them, and then you have a 7-cost one-sided board wipe, and you keep your powerful units, get rid of the basic battle droids, and blow up your opponent's whole board. That seems awesome. How often are you going to have a decent board plus some bad battle droids? I don't know. This card is high uncertainty for me. I think it's very unlikely to be S tier because it seems like it is reliant on exploit. But I could see this being played in hard control decks that don't have a way to make a bunch of battle droids, because hard control decks sometimes actually get up to like 15 resources. And I could easily see them sacrificing a unit or two that isn't a battle droid. Maybe you sacrifice Inferno 4 and some other unit that you have and play this on 11, which you can get to. And you get to see those cards from Inferno 4 and you wipe their board. I don't know. I really like the idea of this card. I don't know if it will prove to be good. I hope that it does. I could easily see this being anywhere from A to D tier, honestly. If I had to guess, let's say B. Ki-Adi-Mundi, composed and confident, 5-cost vigilance ground unit, 5/7 Force Jedi Republic. Coordinate. When an opponent plays their second card each phase, you may draw 2 cards. He is weird. So if you play him and the opponent has already played 1 card, if they play another card, you draw 2, assuming you have coordinate. I think he's actually going to be good. I think he's going to be A or B tier. You could argue that he has no immediate board impact, but I think that what you're usually going to try to do is play him into a situation where you do have coordinate, and therefore he does have some impact just by threatening those draws. And yeah, draws aren't as good in this game as they are in other games, but I don't really think you can easily afford to just give the opponent 2 draws over and over. So ultimately, I think Ki-Adi-Mundi is probably going to be quite a strong card. I could be wrong in that assumption, but I think that I think he'll probably end up in the A or B tier. Satine Kryze, Committed to Peace. 4-cost 0/6 Mandalorian official. Each unit, including enemy units, gains action exhaust to discard cards from an opponent's deck equal to half this unit's remaining HP rounded up. I don't know. So she is an enabler for a mill tactic that doesn't exist in the game right now. And she does a really interesting thing with it. And how good is that tactic? I don't know. I don't think she's D tier because she does something that nothing else does and that is potentially strong. But I could see her being anywhere from A to C tier. If I had to guess, I think this archetype isn't ready yet, and I would probably put her in C or B, but, you know, we'll have to see. Maybe it'll end up being really strong, and she'll be a linchpin card for that archetype, just like Avenger is a linchpin card for some of the, like, hard control builds, and she'll end up in A. I really don't know. Cool card, though. Cool card. And last, but certainly not least, General Grievous Trophy Collector, 3-cost 4/4 Separatist Official, Vigilance Villainy. Ignore the aspect penalty on each lightsaber upgrade you play on this unit. On attack, if this unit has 4 or more lightsaber upgrades attached to him, defeat 4 enemy units. This is the card that I am most confident about in all my tier list. He is S tier, in my opinion. I think you can pretend that his text box is entirely blank, and he is S tier because a 3-cost 4/4 with no downside is extremely good. And then he also has the Separatist and Official traits, which could be relevant. And this lightsaber thing is, I think, basically flavor text and doesn't do anything, but it'll be really cool if you ever get it to work. I doubt I will ever see this lightsaber text working in competitive play, but that's fine. He doesn't need it to work in competitive play because he's a 3-cost 4/4, which is super, super good. I think right now he's basically on the auto-include tier, and everybody immediately plays 3 copies of him just for the stats in decks that can support him. So if I were to pick what the strongest legendary from set 3 would be, my immediate pick would be this guy, General Grievous. Now, he's not the strongest in terms of like the highest raw overall power level, but I think he is the most auto-include and therefore the most S tier. I think my next pick would probably be, now there are 2 of them. So those are the legendaries that I'm the most optimistic about for this set at this time. Overall, I think that the set 3 legendaries, they seem to fall in between sets 1 and 2 for me. I could be wrong, but set 1 had very strong legendaries. Set 2 had, in my opinion, a lot of weaker legendaries. Set 3 seems to me to be in between the 2. It's not as strong as set 1, I think, but I don't think it's as weak as set 2 either. I personally hope that future sets will have somewhat stronger legendaries, but I think set 3 is probably a step in the right direction after set 2. Okay, so that's going to do it for this one. Here's the tier list again for those who are interested in seeing where I'm at on that. And I will perhaps update this. Once we get some more cards from the set 3 actually in play. We have seen all the cards from set 3 now, but we don't have enough testing to be really sure where these cards are going to wind up. And I will perhaps update my tier list with the set 3 legendaries once we've had some more testing and figured out a bit more about how some of these are shaking up and how some of these archetypes are going. So that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thanks to y'all for watching, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.